In episode 6, the conversation between the vice president and Maddie is pretty contentious. Maddie really wants to go off and study abroad in Italy, while her dad puts down the hammer and says, no, you're coming with me and traveling around to political rallies. We have to show a unified front for the re-election campaign. Even though these two clearly do not have a good relationship, when the cameras are put in front of them, they put on a good face. Maddie, however, is miserable. And it's something that Chelsea definitely knows. When her dad finally leaves and Maddie is able to get back to her dorm room with just her and Chelsea, Chelsea says maybe there's something we can do to come up with an excuse so you don't have to go. But Maddie says, no, I'll go, like always. It's something that Chelsea just doesn't understand. She doesn't know how she does it. Faking it like that, it's tough, and she knows that it's tough. In the middle of trying to console Maddie, Chelsea gets word on the radio that there's an FBI agent there to talk to her, and it's Peter. She kind of recognizes Peter, and he introduces himself, and he asks about her whereabouts the day of the metro bombing. What he really wants to know is, who was she protecting? And Rose just blurts out, was it Maddie Redfield? Because that's who they assume Chelsea's supposed to protect. But Chelsea isn't willing to give up that information, not without a formal request. She's very by the book. Peter even reveals that they have reason to believe Maddie is in danger, but they don't have specifics of that. They just think that it was Maddie who was the target that day of the metro bombing. Still, Chelsea isn't willing to reveal any information, especially with a civilian standing right there, the civilian being Rose. Peter tries everything. He even tries dropping Diane Farr's name, but it doesn't work. Chelsea says that she has to run this conversation up the flagpole, and if she does get clearance, she will tell Peter what he wants to know. She takes his number, but until she gets that, she's not revealing any information. The three then go their separate ways, with Peter and Rose heading off to the Georgetown Library, and Chelsea going off to call Ben Almora, the head of the Secret Service, and tell him about Peter's little visit. When Ben hears that this was all Diane Farr's idea, he gets livid. He goes and confronts her. He doesn't like the fact that Diane has her agents confronting his agents about whereabouts, what they were doing, who they're protecting, all of this without the chain of command's approval. He demands to know exactly what Peter is getting himself into. But she's not about to do that, especially after what Ben's people, the Secret Service, did to Rose in the hotel by abandoning her. She basically tells him, mind your own business, but he's not going to mind his own business. He's alerted the vice president and the president about this. A little while later, the president, the vice president, the FBI director, and Almora all meet with Diane. Almora fills the group in on what exactly Peter's up to. The fact that he arrived on Georgetown's campus, along with Rose Larkin, claiming that he's under assignment from Diane Farr, and it has to do with an attack on Maddie. The group all looks to Diane for an explanation, and the only explanation she gives is that after what happened with Rose, she put Rose under the protection of the only person she can trust, and that's Peter. The vice president, though, is especially annoyed. He demands to know what exactly Peter is doing around his daughter, but Diane doesn't know. She hasn't heard it from him. Ben and the vice president both want to bring Peter in to question him on exactly what he's got going on. Diane, meanwhile, tells the president Peter's loyal. He'll report in. I'll have an answer to all of this by the end of the day. Before making her decision, the president wants to speak to Diane and Diane alone. With no one in the room, Diane tells the president Peter's clearly onto something. They picked up whatever the Campbells were doing, and they're carrying the case. I don't know how that led him to Maddie Redfield, but it did. The president isn't really happy with this answer, and she demands that Diane get them back in the White House before it's too late. The thing is, Diane and Peter have been limiting communication, so she's just going to have to wait until Peter touches base with her. Now, the good thing about this whole mess is that it wasn't a total loss for Peter. Chelsea does get clearance to call Peter and tell him she wasn't with Maddie Redfield that day. As for who she was protecting, she can't reveal that information. Before she hangs up, she does tell Peter, if you have any information on an attack against Maddie, I need to know. And Peter tells her, if it wasn't her you were with at the coffee shop, then you're right. You don't need to know. Because she has nothing to do with it. Chelsea's a little confused and asks Peter, what do you mean coffee shop? And Peter says, you tell me. Chelsea says, I'm hanging up now. But right before she does, Peter asks, does the name Osprey mean anything to you? And Chelsea pauses. It's as if she does recognize the name, but she just hangs up anyway. With no real leads, Peter and Rose have to pick up in the library and try to figure out their only clue at this moment, the ring. The coat of arms from the Kingdom of Yugoslavia is close to the ring, but it's not an exact match. Peter then brings up to Rose another thing that's really been bothering him. When everyone thought the bomber was PIF, it became a military operation. The FBI stopped looking into suspects, case was closed, it was over. The person that made that call was Hawkins. So Rose asks, is there any way to look at his files? And Peter's pretty sure he's not going to be able to access his files. But he does get an idea. Go and talk to Hawkins' widow. Peter wants Rose to come with, but Rose thinks that's going to be a waste of time. She wants to stay in the library and figure out if she can find out anything on this ring. They go back and forth with this, but eventually Rose convinces Peter it would be best if he just go and she stay there. After all, nobody kills anybody in a library, except John Wick. After combing over hours of books, of family crests, coat of arms, she thinks she finds it. It's for the Pavlovich family. A quick Google search reveals that the Pavloviches were a monarchy from Yugoslavia. A guy named Andrei Pavlovich, who was a rising political star and a distant cousin of the Crown Prince of Yugoslavia, criticized the Crown Prince's recent statement calling for a reestablishment over the defunct Yugoslavian monarchy in Serbia. A little while later, Pavlovich disappeared. Police had posted a sketch of the suspect that they think killed or took him, and it looks a lot like the guy that killed Rose's aunt and uncle. With this news, Rose just has to wait until Peter returns. And Peter headed off to go talk to Hawkins' widow. Peter asks his widow, who's a little gruff, if he can ask her a few questions on something that he, along with her husband, were looking into before he died. She reluctantly lets him in, and Peter starts to explain that he, along with Hawkins, were part of a group that was investigating the Metro bombing. Hawkins' widow just cuts Peter off and says, I told the other people. I don't know anything. Jamie wasn't allowed to talk about his work with me. Well, one of the reasons why Peter thought that maybe Hawkins would share it with his wife is because his wife used to work in the FBI. She's not really just some civilian. She knows her way around this kind of thing. Peter asks if he can see Hawkins' files, but she brings him to his office and says they already went through all his files. While Peter's kind of surveying the room, Cynthia Hawkins mentions how her husband served for 30 years and now he's being treated like a criminal. And Peter says, I know how you feel. And she shoots back, you have no idea how I feel. But Peter actually does, and he goes into his story about his dad and about being wrongly persecuted. But now he's questioning that. He goes into this whole thing about how, yeah, he thought he knew his dad, but then you start questioning, why does everybody think he was guilty when you actually knew him? So then you start wondering, maybe you didn't know him at all. Maybe they all are right. This does work. Cynthia asks Peter, what does this have to do with you? And Peter says, the person that I'm protecting is in danger, and whatever your husband was looking into, it has something to do with it. That's when Cynthia reveals that she lied earlier when she said that her husband never shared any information. He always picked her brain regarding stuff. She tells Peter that her husband was working on the Metro bombing case for a while, but there was some inconsistency that he picked up on. He thought somebody interfered with the FBI's investigation. All the pieces that they were left with, it just didn't add up. Now, as for all of the Omar Zadal stuff, that was just crap. When the confession came in, the Bureau had a list of suspects, and none of them were connected to Zadar. Hawkins then went back through some case files, and she's pretty sure he found something that pointed straight to a government contractor. The contractor is called Turn Lake Industries. It's a company that Peter's never heard of. But Cynthia goes on to explain that the day her husband went missing, he had a secret meeting with them. She has no idea exactly who was in this meeting, but she's pretty sure it was the CEO. Cynthia's pretty certain that Jamie was killed that day because he was close to getting to the bottom of the Metro bombing case. With this new information, Peter heads back to the library where Rose tells him all about the Pavlovich family and then shows him the picture of Pavlovich's suspected kidnapper. Rose looked into Pavlovich a little bit more, and before he went missing, he was going to the press and railing against an American defense contractor. Pavlovich claimed that this contractor was conducting shadow ops throughout the Balkans. That contractor was Turn Lake Industries. Peter instructs Rose to keep looking into Turn Lake, find out anything she can regarding who they donate to, political allies, things like that. He steps away to go contact Diane Farr and check in. She's on edge, and she tells Peter why, and he explains his side of things. They thought that somebody was out to hurt Maddie Redfield. Ultimately, it seems like that proved to be a dead end. He does think Secret Service ultimately has the missing piece to all of it. But he brings up to Diane Turn Lake Industries. She knows exactly who they are because they have contracts with the Pentagon and all over the world. Peter then tells Diane that he's pretty sure the assassins are working for Turn Lake. Diane tells him to gather everything they have. They need to brief the president. And then she instructs he and Rose to get their ass back to the White House immediately. When Peter walks back over to Rose and her computer, she's dug in and found some stuff. Turn Lake Industries donations to politicians. The person that they donated most to is the vice president. They gather all their stuff together. They head out to their car, but there's an issue. They're being tracked by the two assassins. When word got out that Peter was in Georgetown, he wasn't all that hard to find. So while they're heading back to the White House, they're doing so with company. Now, as for the other party in Georgetown, Maddie and Chelsea, Maddie's planning on meeting her teacher that night, although she's playing it off like she's going to an art show. While Chelsea is accompanying Maddie all over campus to her classes, Eric Monks had to head back to the White House and do his drug test, but he also meets with Ben. The two are friends, but Ben has to show Eric the report that Chelsea put together about what went down in the bar, and it doesn't paint Eric in the best light. Ben isn't really worried about Eric's job. He's just worried that he's in the right headspace to do it. He then, however, asks Eric what his feelings are regarding Chelsea, and he says she's sharp, she's good at her job, she just has a different way of doing things. It's like her and Maddie are friends. And he's not far off from what he says. Chelsea and Maddie are kind of friends. But to Chelsea, that's why she thinks the relationship has worked so well. Good example of that is she lets Maddie borrow one of her necklaces to go out to this art show. When it comes time to actually leave for that art show, though, Eric was supposed to accompany Maddie, but Chelsea says, I'm going to stay on duty for this one. Eric knows that this has to do with what happened the other night. So he asks Chelsea, I'm just wondering how long you're going to hold this grudge for. She's kind of taken aback by this and says, a grudge? No, this is about Maddie. I want to be there for her tonight, and I have to bump someone, and you're the new guy. But now that you brought it up, you're the only member of my detail who's ever shit the bed in a high-stakes situation. It then sparks a little bit of debate between the two. Monks thinking that she doesn't know what a high-stakes situation is, and Chelsea trying to explain to Monks that she wants to get ahead. Everybody thinks this detail's a joke, but she takes it seriously because she wants to one day be protecting the president. Cooler heads eventually do prevail, but Eric's left home, and Chelsea escorts Maddie to the art show, where Maddie ultimately is able to escape. She does leave a note on the mirror that apologizes to Chelsea for doing what she's doing, but Maddie doesn't realize that it's dangerous to do what she's doing. She thinks her teacher's safe. She finds out pretty quickly after getting to her teacher's house, though, that it's not the case. She starts making out with him. Things get hot. Things get heavy. I'm talking it's rainforest sweaty in that room. And then the teacher's roommate shows up, which terrifies Maddie. She's very confused because she's just got this stranger staring at her. She's not wearing a shirt. But then on top of it, she hears her teacher yelling at the guy that he told him he would call him when they were done. He then tells the guy that he doesn't have to force Maddie. She'll say what they need her to say. Maddie has no idea what's going on. And then she hears this roommate hold up a gun and say, I need something else. And he shoots her teacher. Maddie is super terrified. She tries to get to her panic button, but it's too late. The guy grabs her and drags her out of the room. Chelsea does show up at the teacher's apartment, but it's too late. When Maddie went missing, it was a perfect opportunity for Eric Monks to kind of rub it in her face, but he didn't. He actually tipped Chelsea off as to where Maddie might be, because Monks noticed that her and her teacher just had something about them that was weird. Going off this tip, Chelsea got the address, headed to the teacher's apartment, and she found a bloodbath. But she didn't find Maddie. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.